So again, because we don't have time this week, we're only going to meet maybe once or twice. So instead of doing a mimer, which is too long, so we'll just do a short piece from the Liyozhna period. I don't know when the Rebbe taught this, but it's a very central piece that's learned a lot. I hope. And in a certain sense, it contains the basis of all the Yeridat Hadorot, all the psychological work of Chabad. It's based on the Gemara and the last daf of Sota. So since a lot of people, right, it's also in Parshas Shavua, but the last daf is not connected to Sota. It's a lot of stories about the destruction of the second base Mikdash and about the coming redemption also. So, the reason that it's still pertinent is because a lot of people learn Sota during Sfira Somer, so they just finished Daf Mem Tet on Shabbos, on Sunday. Okay, so what does it say? It says like this: Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol Omer. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus, right? He's the Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, the great Rabbi Eliezer. He says, Miyom shecharav Beit HaMikdash, from the day that the temple was destroyed, Sharu Chakimaya lemehave kisefraya. It's enough for the sages to be like scriveners. Or Rashi explains here that it's like a teacher in a grade school. So you have somebody who was as great as Rabbi Akiva. Maybe he was too old already, but you take somebody like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his colleagues, and after the destruction of the temple, it's enough for them to be teachers in a school. So you have these people who were building Torah Shebaal Peh, who were building the oral tradition, and now it's okay for them to be a teacher in school, in a grade school. V'safraya kechazanaya, and that the teachers who were teachers before, it's enough for them now to be just a chazan, just a chazan in shul, a cantor, or somebody who leads the. Meaning, as much as he knew, now we treat him like all he knows is he knows the davening by heart. He knows prayers by heart. That's all. V'chazanaya ke'amadara. And those who were before, who were known to know everything by heart, and they led the prayers in the shul and so on, they can now be like an amaretz. They're like empty, completely empty. They can act like an amaretz. Ve'amade'ara azla v'dildela. And the people who in the time of the temple were called the Nama'aretz, now they're like, they dwindle and diminish and lessen more and more. So this whole Gemara is the basis of what we call the lessening of the generations, right? Yeridat Hadorot. That every generation is now less. And when Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus says this, it's very interesting that he says this. He saw the destruction because he was a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. But he was a Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva. So it's very interesting. So Rabbi Akiva was in his 40s, I think, at the time of the destruction. So he must have been in his 60s, maybe 50s. And he saw the destruction. And suddenly he says everything is different. Because he exactly went through the opposite process, right? He was a farmer. And he decided that he wanted to learn Torah.
Rabbi Akiva.
No, I'm talking about Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol. Rabbi Akiva was even less.
He was a youngster.
But he was in his teens, in his 20s, early 20s, but he was a big, strong guy, and he was a farmer. And they were rich from farming. And he went in the opposite direction, and he decided to go learn Torah, and he had this whole thing, and he ate earth for a while because he had nothing to eat, and so on, all these stories about him. And then after the destruction of the temple, he says, would I try to churn the tide about myself and take myself up from a low place? So now you should know from now on the direction is the opposite. That everything will lessen. And that became basically the staple of our understanding of exile. That's what exile does. That from generation to generation you become less. So now Chassidus wants to turn the tide, wants to bring the Mashiach. So what do you do with something like this? So you want to return.
Certainly did change the tide.
So what do you do with something like this? Because we have this inheritance from him, spiritual inheritance. You're supposed to lessen all the time. It becomes less.
It's only up until the coming of Mashiach.
I said it, but the Mashiach hasn't come yet. So how can you turn the tide before?
Prepare for Mashiach.
So that's one possibility. But another possibility is that you have to reinterpret what he said. If you reinterpret what he said, you can keep what he said, but also turn the tide and prepare the world for the coming of Mashiach. So there were a lot of big Chassidim, a lot of big Rebbeim, who, even though I don't know if they taught this piece, but they certainly acted according to it. Meaning they certainly encouraged people to interpret the lessening of the generations in this completely novel way. So let's see what he says. אמור הז"ל שרו חכימי למאה וכספריה וכולי וחזניה כעמא דערא. So like we said, Rabbi Eliezer ben Orkano says that since the time of the destruction, each generation is less than the previous generation, and people lose in their stature in terms of holiness. כי מקדש שני נחרב על עניין שנאת חינם. והתיקון יהיה על ידי ואהבת לרעך כמוך. He says, even though there are many theories about what was the most important cause of the destruction of the Second Temple, in the end we go with the idea, most everybody goes with the idea that it was because of baseless hatred. Therefore the rectification will be through loving your neighbor as yourself.
Baseless love.
He doesn't say that. It doesn't say avat chinam. That's an invention that was later. I think Rav Kook invented that. I don't know who invented it, but it was later than the Alter Rebbe. It just says the rectification for baseless hatred is like any kind of hatred. Is to love your fellow. As it says in the Tanya. So you see here that the Tanya has already been printed, but it's not clear. You can't know in these. It could be that somebody added this. The person who heard him added this later. It's hard to know. You have to see the original handwriting to see if this was, if he said this after Tafkuf Nun Tet. So he said this after 1799, when the Tanya was printed. 1797, sorry. למהווה אחד באחד דווקא, ולא כשיש חס וחלילה לפירוד בין נשמות. So, what does it mean to love? Is to come together, is that the souls come together and they're not separate from one another. So each person doesn't feel separate, meaning I have to take care of my business and I don't care about yours. Well, yeah, there has to be, in a certain sense, a sense of communal responsibility. We help one another. Because the Almighty cannot dwell in a broken place. And broken means that you feel separate. So again, this is the ego, basically. It's the biggest problem. And interestingly, until the time of the Alter Rebbe, or until the time of Chassidus, you don't see so much attention being drawn to the ego and its problems. This is something that happened in the last 300 years. Obviously, it's long before Freud, but it's something new relatively. So here, the spiritual meaning of the ego is that it causes you to feel separate, causes you to feel superior, or different, but most importantly, you don't care about others.
Because you don't consider them to be significant.
Right, because only you're significant. That's what feeling separate causes you to feel. ולהבין ביותר, על דרך שכתיב אין אני והוא יכולים לדור בדירה אחת. כלומר, כל זמן שלא בטל אליי במציאות, לגמרי, שמחזיק את עצמו לאיזה יש ודבר, כל דור, אין אור השם שרואה ומתגלה בו כביכול. So he says that as long as I feel that I'm separate, then what does it mean that God can't dwell in me? Because the sages say, it's as if God said, I and him cannot dwell in the same place, meaning in his body, in his reality. Why? Because as long as he feels, as long as he's not nullified his being to me entirely, and so therefore he holds from himself that he's something, he's a yesh, he has yeshut, so the light of Hashem cannot be revealed through him. ומחמת אהבתו המסותרת שיש לנו, לבל יידח ממנו נידח, משפילו ומורידו מגדולתו. So what does Hashem do in order to awaken the person so that he's not lost? So out of his love for us, out of his love, he breaks the person. He lowers him. He lowers him to a lower place. The moment that a person has troubles, he stops feeling separate. It's a very interesting thing. The moment that a person has a sickness, an illness, whatever tragedy befalls him, and suddenly he's not, at least, he doesn't feel superior, like you said to other people. He doesn't feel separate.
He starts to feel sorry for himself.
What?
He starts to feel sorry for himself.
That too, but that's
Comes on his skin.
okay. But that's the negative side. The positive side of these things is that the person understands that he's not as strong. He's not the island that he thought he was. He's not the self-sufficient island that he thought he was. Suddenly he needs everybody. Suddenly he's even saying misken when he's a nebuch, what really he feels is that he's dependent. That's what causes him to feel so nebuch, like so misken, so I don't know how you say it in English. There's no word for it.
Nothing.
He feels
You're nobody.
he's deprecated. He's self-deprecated. So that he says Hashem sends the person in order to sever his feeling of being self-sufficient, of being independent of everybody else, and different than everybody else, and superior, like you said. And all this is so that he's not lost. He says, because if the person lives alone, and feels that he has no need for anybody else, and he's not involved with other people, then he's lost. Then the soul is lost, because the whole purpose of the soul coming into this world is to be connected, is to do things for other people. So Hashem takes him down, and notice he uses here the word mashpilo. He gives him shiflus, he gives him lowliness. And it's interesting that he connects here the shiflut with bittul. It's almost like he's saying,
like to humiliate.
no, that's the modern Hebrew meaning. But the regular meaning of shiflut is just lowly. That he recognizes his shortcomings, he recognizes his limitations. The person recognizes how unperfect he is. So much so that if this person that Hashem wants to lower, he's a Talmid Chacham, he's a person who really learns. So the punishment is, it's not punishment again, the lowering causes him to forget what he learned. So not only is he ill, not only does he have some tragedy, but if he was able to learn, so he loses his part in the Torah.
Better off if he was learning more.
What?
To get out of a mess, you need to learn more. So,
Okay, but how painful is it that, for instance, you learned all of Shas many times and you knew it, and then suddenly you forget it? That shouldn't be part of the. I mean, let's say you're ill. Settle, you're ill. Why are you forgetting? So he says no. In the Talmud Chacham, the forgetfulness, not being able to remember what he knew, what he learned, that is the lowering. That because for a sage, that's what counts. Maybe he doesn't look so much at his health. He doesn't care so much for his body, and this he ignores it. But when it comes to his learning, that was the most precious thing in his life. So Hashem lowers him by taking away his knowledge. And if he's full of pride, if he's a rich man, he becomes a poor man. So Hashem takes away his source of pride. He takes away his source of feeling different and superior. וכן בכל דבר שמתגאה, אם יתחרט בעצמו, ומביט בדעתו, איך כולה קמי כלא חשיב באמת, ומכניע את עצמו לפניו יתברך, אין צריך להשפיל. He says, this is how it works in every person. Look for their place where they have this feeling of self-sufficiency, where they're important in their own eyes, and that's where Hashem will lower them from. He'll take away that thing. Until when? Until he regrets the way he saw himself. He מתחרט בעצמו. That he brings regret upon himself. And he says, I shouldn't have acted this way. I shouldn't have acted with haughtiness, with pride. And so therefore the person begins to meditate on the fact that next to Hashem, everything is like nothing. And he too, he's also like nothing. He's not such a big, right, as they used to say, that the cemeteries are full of people that were indispensable. Suddenly you understand, compared to what Hashem is doing here in the world, I count for close to nothing. He still wants me in the world. It's not like he wants me out of the world. But in the grand scheme of things, less than a footnote. Okay? That's called להכניע את עצמו לפניו יתברך. So if a person does that, even if he does it consistently, every day, as part of his avoda, as part of his divine service, he doesn't wait until the day when he gets sick, and then he begins to think, oh, how could I have treated my neighbor this way? How could I have treated my wife this way, my children this way, and so on and so forth. And he says, but I'm really nothing. So if a person doesn't wait for tragedy to strike, so he may not ever need to be lowered. He might be doing it to himself. That's called bittul. That's what he says. It's called bittul. והסימן לזה שנפשו כעפר לכל תהיה. And how do you know if you've reached this state of lowliness? When you can feel yourself being like earth, the dust that everybody walks on when they walk on the street. Meaning that the person doesn't feel that he's anything more than the dust on the ground. מחמת שעבודתו ותפילתו וכל מעשיו פסולה בעיניו. Very, very strong language. Because when he inspects his own service of God, his prayers, all his actions, they are considered pasul. Pasul is not worthy.
Forbidden.
No, pasul is not worthy. It's pasul. Pasul milah alot al midah. It's something. It's just not worth its name even. Okay? In his own eyes. Okay? Shum shlemut b'ma'asav, because he doesn't feel that there's anything perfect or whole about how he acts. על דרך גבוה נבזה בעיניו נמאס, יראה השם יכבד. That's the meaning of the verse in Mishlei, that the person who is scorned in his own eyes, he's tired of himself, is a word, nim'as, or he feels that he's disgusting. Okay? Again, we're talking about his actions. Yirei Hashem yechabed. He's the person who will get a chance to serve those who fear God. Meaning he's the person who Hashem brings close to him. The more I'm willing to accept the fact that whatever I do is not complete, it's always missing, it's never whole, the more I can accept that, the more I merit to be together or to serve those who are God-fearing people. Okay? So the reward for this, for feeling not the inadequacy, but feeling that everything that I do, it has an ulterior motive. And so everything is kol ma'asav psula beinav, everything has a blemish in everything that I do. So the more I can feel that, the more I can come to fearing to being together, to being respected, or being in one group with those who truly fear Hashem. Even how far does this self-nullification or lowliness go? That even when he sees the lightest of the light people, meaning that he's very, very low level, Yan שנמצא בו בוודאי דבר טוב, כי אפילו פושעי ישראל מלאים מצוות כרימון, אוהב אותו. So he says, even such a person who is the lightest of the light, who has nothing to talk about, no merits.
Save the fact that he's a human being.
Save the fact that he... And he treats him as if he's just a person that he needs to respect. But not only that he needs to respect, but he's full of mitzvos. Because the sages say that even the iniquitous of the Jews, they're full of mitzvos like a pomegranate. And he loves him. He loves this person who normally he would have scorned. So that's the sign. That's the sign that he's reached what we call shiftless. He's reached a state of lowliness. ואם לאו, שתופס את עצמו לאיזה יש בדבר, ממילא נמשך שרואה גנות של חברו, ביטול כנ"ל, גנות של חברו, מגיס דעתו, אין אני והוא. So, whenever he sees the negative in his friend, instead of seeing the positive, that's when God says to him, you and I can't dwell in the same space. Okay. So this is very, very basic. So how does this have anything to do with the Gemara that we started with? So we'll see in a moment, but you can already understand.
So by degrading these people from their high positions, it's the union of the shiftless.
Right. But it's done. Sharu means it's permitted. Sharu is mutar. So sometimes it's translated maspik. It's enough for the sages to be school teachers. But another way of reading it is it's permitted. Because what did a lot of people say? They said, I'm a big Talmid Chacham, and kavod the Torah, the honor of the Torah, doesn't allow me to lower myself. So it says, no, what Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkin is saying, that from the time the temple was destroyed, sharu, you're permitted. The sages, even the sages of the Talmud, they're permitted to become school teachers. Why? Because the person needs to lower himself.
Yeah, but you went into other types of people who became nothing. You're not allowed to become nothing.
It says even a Nama Aretz can dwindle himself even more. Because even a Nama Aretz has something. So he too has to lower himself. Shiftless has become the only way to prevent the atrocity of feeling superior. And it's, as he says here, it's the way to rectify the sin of baseless hatred. Because without it, without feeling lowliness, without feeling shiftless, the person won't come ever to respect somebody who's lower than him. You have to feel lowly. The whole purpose of lowliness is to remind me that I have no cause to patronize someone else. I have no cause to feel superior to someone else. Why? Because I know my faults, and they're just as big as anybody else's. Probably bigger.
So, probably.
נמצא שיקיימו כל ישראל מצוות ואהבת על ידי ביטול קנה יתגלה אורו ויבוא משיח. So what do we get from this? That when the entire Jewish people learn to nullify themselves, okay, before everybody, יתגלה אורו ויבוא משיח. The light of the Mashiach will be revealed and it will come. וזהו שאמרו רז"ל שגאולה תהיה בזכות התורה, פעם אחרת אמרו עתידה תורה שתשכח מישראל. וכן כמעט בכל דבר שאמרו שהגאולה תלוי בו. אמרו זה ההיפוך. כי כמו, so just to get into it, before continuing, this whole topic is what the sages meant when they said that the Mashiach will come in merit of the Torah. But another time they said, and it's related to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that the redemption will come because they'll forget the Torah. Okay? Or like you look in book of Isaiah, so it says, Ani Hashem b'ita achishena, I am Hashem, in its time I will hasten it. But the sages don't understand it as one thing. They said either in its time, meaning the redemption comes whenever there is a certain period of time that's elapsed and now it's time to redeem the world. And on the other hand, achishena zachu, that if you merit, then Hashem makes it appear very quickly. So what's going on? So which one is it? So decide. Or like in this case, what's the story? So he says, very interesting, are we supposed to forget the Torah? Not supposed to forget the Torah? He says, וכן כמעט בכל דבר שאמרו שהגאולה תלוי בו, אמרו זה ההיפוך. So any criteria, any cause that the sages said, because of this, the third temple will be rebuilt. Because of this, we'll merit the redemption. They also said exactly the opposite. And thanks to the opposite of this, that's why we'll merit the redemption. How can it be? So he says here, כי בכל דבר יש טוב ורע. Because really, everything in the world is mixed up between good and evil. Good and bad. For example, when a person learns Torah, so if he merits, it becomes his elixir of life. And if he doesn't merit, it becomes his elixir of death. How can that be? Yeah. It's like a person would take Tylenol, and for some people it would cause the headache to go away, and for other people it would cause the headache to become 10 times stronger. It's hard to imagine. Right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if we would put a drug like that on the shelves. Right? It's called aspirin. Okay. וצריך קודם המשיח להצטרף בכור, להוציא שיגים מכסף, וכן הדרך משל, בסיר נפוח עולה הקצף למעלה ומכסה השומן והטוב, עד שהאדם שהוא גבוה וממעל להם מסיר הקצף ומשליחו והמאכל נשאר ברור וצלום. So why is this happening? Because this is a strange thing. I don't fully understand why it works this way. Maybe you as a chemist will know. But when you want to purify gold, you want to purify silver, you actually have to add the impurity. The theory is, as far as I understand, that the impurity is caused by other chemicals, and you want to gather those chemicals. So to gather those chemicals, you have to add another impurity. They won't gather by themselves.
I never heard of that.
Okay, so what did you hear?
No.
Okay, but that's the mashal that's always brought in many sources, that the jeweler, when he wants to purify the metal in order to start working with it, he heats it and he adds some kind of impurity, but the impurity is worth it because it draws out all the different impurities in the metal.
I never heard of this. It doesn't mean anything.
Okay, that's what he's saying.
I could write a book on all this since I don't know.
So how is this the same idea as with the purifying a person from his hubris, from his pride? So in a certain sense, like we're talking about Torah here, that because everything is mixed up and I want to separate the good from the evil, so how do I separate out the evil? I have to introduce something that's also negative but has the ability to draw out all the evil. Okay? So this is a thing that what the sages call Rishaim kinus shelehem yafel la'olam v'ra lahem. When evil gets together, if you're able to draw it together, then it's a good thing for the world, and it's bad for the evil. Why is it bad for the evil? Because now you can take it all out in one shot. But it's good for the world because we got rid of the evil. So he says that the evil can't stand being together. It can't stand.
Evil doesn't like unity.
Right. And that's exactly what we're seeking. So he says the whole reason that there's this lessening of the generations, this spiritual degradation of the generations, is because this itself leads to the ability to take out the evil. Okay? What time is it? Oh, fine. We have time?
It's 5 minutes past 9.
We have more time?
Yeah. I have to just check with my wife what she's doing. I'll call you in. What time you have to start?
We're finished. וכן על דרך משל בסיר נפוח עולה הקצף למעלה. Same thing happens when you cook. When you cook, you get all these crud and junk on top. ומכסה השומן והטוב. And it covers the good part, the food that's inside the pot.
Flows to the surface.
Right. עד שאדם שהוא גבוה ממעלה מסיר הקצף משליחו והמאכל נשאר ברור וצלול. Until you have to bring somebody who's looking at it from above. He's not inside. He's not being cooked inside. He's being cooked inside. The evil is mixed up with him. He can't tell the difference. But a person who's looking from above, he has the ability now to take a spoon and remove all the crud that's collected at the top. וזהו עולם ברור ראית. And that's what it means when it says that you saw a clarified world. Rabbi Shimon, I think it was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he went up into the heavens. He said he saw an upside down world. Maybe it was the sun. So when he came back to Rabbi Shimon, he said, I saw an upside down world. So said Rabbi Shimon, on the contrary, you saw the world the way it's supposed to be. Not upside down. כי בכל הבירורים שמעלה האדם על ידי אהבה ויראה, עולה הקצף. ודאי למבין. Because every time that a person fixes something in the world through love, so what he is actually causing is the crud to increase. Because the good actions, they have a tendency to push away the negative. And so the negative collects at the top of the seal, of the, how do you say seal?
Saucepan.
The
Seal?
what? Yeah.
Seal is a saucepan.
Not saucepan, the whole seal. Not the little ones.
Vat.
A pot. A vat. Vat is the way you make whiskey in. Huh?
Okay, that's the big one. Yeah.
ונחזור לענייננו, so let's go back to our topic. אם אין משפיל את עצמו באמת, אז הם משפילים אותו מלמעלה לטובתו. So if a person is now willing to exercise lowliness about himself, so because Hashem doesn't want him to be lost, he doesn't want his soul to be lost, so he exercises the lowliness for him. He makes him lowly. Right? And that's what it means. וזהו שרו חכימי אלה מהווה. כי עם הדערו על ידי דעת עצמו, על ידי הכרח שמכריחין אותו מלמעלה להיות נבזה ונמאס בעיניו, כדי שאוכל אחר כך להיות התגלות אלוקות בו. So that's what Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanos meant when he said that it's now permitted for the wise to be school teachers and so on, because that is their shiftless. What they're doing there is they're lowering their stature. They're accepting the fact that they're not more worthy than being a school teacher. That's all they're probably good at. So that changes the whole understanding of Yeridat Hadorot, of the lowering of the generations, the diminishing of the generations. Why? Because what we're saying is that this is a spiritual, psychological practice that has now become permitted. So the lowering of the generations doesn't really mean that the people in our generation are less than people 2,000 years ago. It could be, on the contrary, it could be that we're even at a higher level. Well, what it does mean is that the overriding principle of life should be that you're less. You have to lower yourself all the time. Okay, let's end here. and we'll finish it tomorrow if we have time. But you can see why this is such an important short piece, because he basically explains the Yesoda Yesodot, the foundation of all foundations, of Chassidic psychology, which is you need to lower yourself. You can't hold from yourself.
Trust no one. Every day you die.
Including
Don't
yourself.
trust in yourself.